The first ray of sunlight cut across the horizon of Pinecrest when John Anderson stepped onto the porch of the main house, holding a steaming mug of coffee between his calloused hands. At 52, his face bore the marks of someone who knew every inch of that land as if it were an extension of his own body. Hope Ranch awakened to the familiar sounds of roosters, the mooing of cows, and the gentle rustling of coffee leaves swaying in the morning breeze. "Dad, did you see that the fence in the north pasture has cut wire again?" Greg, his oldest son, appeared on the porch, still adjusting his hat. At 24, an agronomy student in town, he carried the determination inherited from his father, but also a modern restlessness that John sometimes didn't fully understand. John frowned, placing the mug on the rustic wooden table. "Third time this month. That's not normal, Greg. Fences don't cut themselves." "That's what I thought too." Greg leaned against the wooden column, crossing his arms. "And there's another strange thing. Yesterday, when I came back from college, I saw a car I didn't recognize parked on the road, right in front of our gate. When I approached, it drove away fast." Concern settled in John's chest like a heavy stone. 40 years tending to that property had taught him to distinguish between coincidences and signs that something wasn't right. And lately, the signs had been multiplying in a disturbing way. "Dad, good morning." Isabella appeared from the kitchen, her 18 years bringing contagious energy even in the early morning hours. With her hair tied in a ponytail and wearing a flowery blouse, she contrasted with the tension-filled environment. "I was taking care of the chickens and found something. Weird." "What kind of weird thing?" John turned to his daughter, feeling his stomach tighten. "There's a small hole in the ground right near the chicken coop. Looks like someone dug something and then tried to cover it up. And, look." She extended her hand, showing a small piece of black plastic. "It was buried there." Greg took the object, examining it carefully. "This looks like part of some electronic equipment. Dad, don't you think that we're being watched?" John completed his son's sentence, verbalizing the fear that had been growing in his chest for weeks. "That's exactly what I'm thinking." Mary, his wife, emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. At 48, she maintained the serene beauty of someone who had found in rural life the peace she had always sought. But John noticed the concern in her brown eyes when she approached the group. "John, I need to tell you something." Her voice was lower than normal. "Yesterday, when I went to the store in town, Mrs. Celia told me that Adams Ranch is also experiencing strange problems. Tools disappearing, equipment malfunctioning without explanation. Adam didn't tell me anything about this." John scratched his graying beard, thoughtful. "That's because he's embarrassed. He thinks people will think he can't take care of his property anymore." Mary moved closer to her husband, touching his arm. "But Mrs. Celia said it's not just him. People all over the area are talking about strange things happening." Silence fell among the family, each lost in their own thoughts. John observed his property through the porch, the coffee plantations extending along the hillside, the corral where cows grazed peacefully, the preserved forest surrounding the spring. All of it represented 3 generations of work, sweat, and dedication. "You know what bothers me the most?" John broke the silence, his voice carrying a growing determination. "This feeling that someone is messing with what's ours, with what we've built with so much effort." "Dad, what do you think we should do?" Isabella asked, her youth not completely hiding her apprehension. John looked at each member of his family, feeling the weight of the responsibility he carried. It wasn't just about protecting the property, it was about preserving a way of life, a history, a legacy that couldn't simply disappear. "First, let's be more alert. Greg, I want you to document everything you consider strange. Photos, times, details. Isabella, when you're taking care of the animals, pay attention to anything out of the ordinary." He turned to Mary. "And you, my love, keep talking with the neighbors. Information is our best weapon right now." Mary nodded, recognizing in her husband's posture the same determination that had transformed that ranch into the prosperous place it was today. "And if it's not enough?" Greg asked, concern evident in his voice. John looked again at the property, then at the sky that was beginning to clear completely. Then we'll find out exactly who's behind this and why. This land is ours, Greg, and nobody's going to take it from us without a fight. The coffee cooled in the forgotten mug on the table, but none of them cared. There were more urgent matters to resolve, and they all knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than they imagined. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. 3 days after the conversation on the porch, a blue pickup truck raised dust on the road, leading to the main house of Hope Ranch. John immediately recognized the vehicle, and a smile appeared on his face for the first time in weeks. Frank, Martin, or Mr. Frank as everyone knew him, was more than a family friend. He was like an older brother who always appeared at the right moments. "Look who's here." John descended the porch steps, extending his arms to greet the visitor. "It's good to see you here, Frank." Mr. Frank, at 60, maintained the upright posture and attentive gaze of someone who had spent 3 decades serving in the state police. His grey hair and well-trimmed mustache contrasted with the warm smile he always brought when visiting the Andersons. "John, my friend, I need to talk to you." The seriousness in Frank's voice made John immediately furrow his brow. "But first, I want to introduce you to someone very special." It was then that John noticed the imposing German shepherd that jumped elegantly from the truck bed. The animal had an impressive presence, impeccable dark and golden coat, intelligent eyes, and a posture that demonstrated constant discipline and alertness. "This is Apollo," Frank said, gesturing for the dog to approach. "He's a trained canine, John, and he might be exactly what you need right now." "Canine?" Greg appeared from the workshop, cleaning his hands on a cloth. Curiosity was evident in his expression. "Like police dogs?" "Exactly like police dogs, because he was trained by them." Frank ran his hand over Apollo's head, who remained alert but calm. "Apollo was part of a special program I developed in my last years of service. He has differentiated skills." Mary and Isabella arrived from the house, attracted by the commotion. Isabella, an animal lover since childhood, approached cautiously. "He's beautiful," she exclaimed, but kept a respectful distance. "Can I pet him?" "Apollo, introduce yourself," Frank commanded, and to everyone's surprise, the dog sat, offered his paw, and then lay down in a fluid sequence. "Now you can, Isabella. He's already recognized that you're family." While Isabella petted the animal, John pulled Frank to a more private corner. "Frank, what's going on? You showing up here with a police dog isn't a coincidence." Mr. Frank sighed deeply, looking around before answering. "John, do you remember my friend Ronald, who works at the Pinecrest Sheriff's Office?" "I remember. He told me there have been several incidents in the region. Small thefts, vandalism, but mainly espionage." The word came out heavy from Frank's lips. "The ranches are being watched, John, and everything indicates there's a pattern, an organization behind it." John felt his blood freeze in his veins. "So we're not imagining things?" "Definitely not, and there's more." Frank lowered his voice even further. "Ronald told me there are indications that someone is systematically mapping the water resources in the region. Springs, wells, water catchment points." "Our spring," John murmured, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. "Exactly, and that's why I brought Apollo." Frank looked at the dog, who even while distracted by Isabella's petting, kept his ears alert to any different sound. "So I was trained not only to detect intruders, but to identify suspicious behavioral patterns. He can tell when someone is observing, even from a distance." Greg approached the 2 men, clearly hearing part of the conversation. "Mr. Frank, are you saying we might be being spied on even now?" "It's possible, Greg, and Apollo will help us find out," Frank addressed the whole group. "That's why I came here with a proposal. I want to leave Apollo with you for a while. He'll serve as a guardian, but also as our extra eyes and ears." Mary approached, holding John's arm. "Does this mean we're really in danger?" "It means we need to be cautious," Frank responded diplomatically. "Apollo is our guarantee that nothing will go unnoticed." John observed the dog, who was now standing staring fixedly in the direction of the woods that surrounded the property. His instincts seemed to have detected something that humans couldn't perceive. "Has he detected something already?" John asked. Frank followed Apollo's gaze. Probably. He's trained not to react aggressively initially, just to observe and memorize patterns. Memorize patterns? Isabella repeated, intrigued. Apollo can recognize people by their movements, by their smells, by their habits. If someone is regularly prowling around the property, he'll identify and alert us. At that moment, as if to demonstrate his abilities, Apollo emitted a low bark and headed toward the side of the house. Everyone followed him, finding fresh footprints in the moist earth near the kitchen window. These footprints aren't from any of us, Mary said, her voice trembling. Frank crouched down, examining the marks. Someone was here this morning, probably observing the house's activity. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with a reality that none of them wanted to accept, but that they could no longer deny. Then it's decided, John said, his voice firm despite the apprehension. Apollo stays with us. And Frank, I need you to teach us everything you know about protection. Frank nodded gravely. We're going to transform this ranch into a fortress, John, but an intelligent fortress. Apollo barked once, as if approving the plan, and everyone knew that their lives had changed forever. Apollo's first night at the ranch brought a disturbing revelation. Around 2 in the morning, his insistent barking woke the entire family. John jumped out of bed, quickly put on his boots, and went out to the yard, followed by Greg, who carried a powerful flashlight. "What is it, Apollo?" John whispered, observing. The dog, whose nose was pointed toward the side of the barn, his body tense and ears pricked up. Greg directed the beam of light where the animal indicated. "Dad, look at this!" In the damp mud, illuminated by the flashlight, were clear footprints, boots with special soles, different from those they had found near the kitchen. Whoever it was had deliberately walked around the barn, examining the structures. 2 people, Frank appeared behind them, already dressed and alert. He had slept in the guest room, but clearly hadn't rested deeply. "Look here, John, 2 different footprint patterns." Mary and Isabella appeared on the porch, wrapped in robes. The tension was palpable in the night air. "They were here a short time ago," Frank continued, crouched beside the marks. "The earth is still settling. Apollo detected them at the right moment." "Detected how?" Greg asked, fascinated and frightened at the same time. He noticed changes in the night sounds, in the smells carried by the wind, in the movements of other animals on the ranch. Frank stroked Apollo's head. "It's military training, son. He knows when something doesn't belong in the environment." John stood up, his fist clenched. "This has gone too far. Nobody invades my property in the middle of the night without consequences." "Easy, John." Frank put his hand on his friend's shoulder. "Anger won't solve our problem. We need to be smarter than them." In the following days, the Anderson family adopted a completely new routine. Frank taught everyone how to move around the property more consciously, how to observe signs of invasion, and how to document any evidence they found. It was Greg who made the next important discovery. On Thursday afternoon, while checking the coffee plantation on the southern slope, he noticed a metallic reflection among the foliage. Approaching cautiously, he found something that made his blood run cold, a camouflaged micro-camera with a small antenna indicating data transmission. "Dad, you need to see this urgently," Greg shouted through the radio that Frank had given to each family member. When John and Frank arrived at the location, they found Greg standing a few meters from the device, clearly shaken. "I didn't touch anything, like Mr. Frank taught," he said, his voice trembling. "But look at this. They're filming our plantation." Frank examined the equipment without touching it, taking photos from various angles. "This is professional equipment, John. It's not amateur stuff." "How long do you think this has been here?" John asked, feeling a mixture of anger and violation. "By the state of the camouflage, I'd say at least 2 weeks, maybe more." Frank stood up, thoughtful. "And if there's one here, there are certainly others." Confirmation came the same day. Isabella, following Frank's instructions to carefully observe the ranch animals, noticed that the chickens consistently avoided a specific corner of the coop. Investigating more closely, she discovered another device, this one hidden inside a waterproof box buried superficially. "It's a microphone," Frank explained when the family gathered in the living room after dinner. "Long-distance listening equipment." "They're listening to our conversations?" Mary asked, horrified. Probably all those that happen near the chicken coop and the kitchen area, Frank confirmed. That's why Apollo was so agitated yesterday. He sensed that the sounds from the house were being captured in an abnormal way. John banged his fist on the table. Who's behind this, Frank, and why? We don't know for sure yet, but I have a suspicion. Frank pulled up a chair, sitting closer to the family. Remember I mentioned the mapping of water resources? This is no coincidence. Someone is specifically interested in the springs in the region. Our spring, Greg murmured. Exactly. And you know who else has an interest in controlling the water resources around here. John and Mary exchanged a look loaded with understanding. Oliver Finch, John said the name as if it were a curse word. The same one who tried to buy part of the ranch last year, Mary added. Frank nodded gravely. Ronald told me that Finch has been making offers for various properties in the region, always focusing on areas with access to water. But spying like this, that's criminal, Isabella said, indignant. It's the act of someone who doesn't. Take no for an answer, Frank corrected. Someone who prefers to force a situation rather than negotiate fairly. Apollo, who had remained lying by the fireplace, suddenly stood up and walked to the window, looking fixedly outside. His muscles tensed, but he didn't bark. He just maintained an alert position. They're out there again, Frank interpreted the dog's behavior, probably observing the house to see our reaction to today's discoveries. John rose slowly, turning off the living room light. Then let's give them something to see. Through the dark window they could all notice a faint light point in the woods, about 200 meters away. Someone using night vision binoculars. Now we know they're actively observing us, Frank whispered. The question is, what are we going to do with this information? John looked at his family, then at Apollo, who remained vigilant at the window. A new determination was growing in his chest. We're going to play their game, he said calmly. But by our rules. Friday morning brought a surprise that none of the Anderson family expected. Around 10 o'clock, a black BMW parked in front of the ranch gate, raising a cloud of dust on the dirt road. John, who was fixing a fence with Greg, stopped working when he recognized the driver. Oliver Finch, he murmured, cleaning his hands on the cloth hanging from his belt. What the hell does he want here? Greg put down the tool, instinctively positioning himself beside his father. Apollo, who was resting under the shade of a nearby tree, immediately stood up, his ears alert and his body in a moderate alert position. Oliver got out of the car with the calculated elegance of someone accustomed to impressing. At 45, he wore expensive clothes that tried to look casual, designer jeans, an Italian dress shirt, and leather shoes that cost more than the monthly salary of many rural workers in the region. His smile was polished but didn't reach his eyes. John, good to find you. Oliver approached with his hand extended, completely ignoring the tension in the air. I hope I'm not interrupting. John shook the offered hand, but his grip was firm and brief. Oliver, what brings you to my property? Always straight to the point, aren't you? Oliver laughed, a sound that seemed forced. I admire that about you, John. It's a rare quality these days. Frank, who was organizing some tools in the workshop, approached silently. His police experience had taught him to read people, and every fiber of his being screamed that this man was dangerous. I came here to renew my proposal, Oliver continued, taking an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. I know that last year you found my offer inadequate, so I decided to improve it significantly. John looked at the envelope but made no move to take it. I don't remember asking for a new proposal. Sometimes life forces us to reconsider decisions, doesn't it? Oliver maintained his smile, but there was something sharp in his voice. Times are getting tough for small producers. Security problems, technical difficulties, infrastructure issues. What kind of security problems? Greg intervened, unable to contain his irritation. Oliver turned to the young man, evaluating him with calculating eyes. Well, you must know better than I do, son. I heard that there have been some incidents around here. Damaged fences, malfunctioning equipment. The way he said incidents made John realize that Oliver knew exactly what was happening. More than that, he was behind it all. Interesting how you know details about my property, John said slowly, taking a step forward. Almost as if you were observing. For a fraction of a second, Oliver's smile faltered. These are small towns, John. News travels fast. What news exactly? Frank approached, his ex-cop posture evident. Because I also live in the region and haven't heard about widespread problems. Oliver evaluated Frank with more attention, clearly trying to classify him. And you are? Frank Martin, family friend. Frank offered no more information, maintaining a neutral but vigilant expression. Ah yes, the ex-cop. The way Oliver said it confirmed that he had investigated people close to the Andersons. Then you must understand the importance of precaution in uncertain times. I understand perfectly, Frank responded, especially when someone is trying to create those uncertain times. The air became charged with tension. Apollo took a few steps forward, strategically positioning himself between the family and the unwanted visitor. Beautiful dog, Oliver commented, but kept his distance from the animal. German Shepherd, isn't it? They're very observant dogs. Very, John confirmed. He has a special ability to detect people with bad intentions. Oliver laughed again, but the discomfort was evident. Well, back to the subject that brought me here. He waved the envelope. This offer is substantially more generous, enough for you to buy a larger property elsewhere, away from complications. What kind of complications? Mary appeared on the porch, having heard part of the conversation. Isabella was at her side, clearly uncomfortable with the visitor's presence. Mrs. Anderson, Oliver nodded politely. As I was telling your husband, the region is undergoing changes. Major development projects, new environmental regulations, water infrastructure issues. Water infrastructure, John repeated, his suspicions being confirmed. Yes, studies are being conducted on the efficient use of regional water resources. Some experts suggest there may be reorganization in access to springs. Frank and John exchanged a look. It was confirmation that Oliver was specifically interested in controlling the water. And you're involved in these studies? Frank asked. Directly. I'm a businessman concerned with the sustainable development of the region, Oliver responded evasively. I believe that sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good. The greater good? John couldn't contain his indignation. Or your personal benefit? Oliver's smile finally disappeared. John, you're an intelligent man. You must realize that certain changes are inevitable. The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or the problem. That sounded like a threat, Greg said, stepping forward. It wasn't a threat, it was a realistic observation. Oliver placed the envelope on the hood of his BMW. The offer will be valid for 1 week. I suggest you consider it seriously. Me. Headed back to his car but stopped before getting in. Oh, and John, it would be prudent to be more careful with security around here. You never know what kind of people might be prowling around isolated properties. With that, Oliver got into his car and left, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy silence. Frank was the first to speak. He basically confessed to everything. Confessed. And threatened, John added, picking up the envelope from the car hood. He opened it quickly, reading the contents. 3 times the value he offered last year. That means he's desperate, Mary observed, or that what he's planning to do is worth much more than that. Frank added grimly. Apollo barked once, looking in the direction the car had disappeared, as if wanting to make sure the threat had really gone away. Now we know exactly who we're dealing with, John said, tearing the check into small pieces. The question is, what are we going to do about it? If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. On Saturday afternoon, the main house of Hope Ranch had never received so many visitors at once. John had spent the entire morning on the phone, inviting all the ranchers in the region to an urgent meeting. The response was immediate and unanimous. Everyone would come. It seems we're not the only ones with problems, Mary commented, serving coffee to the third group of neighbors arriving. The dining room table was full of snacks that she and Isabella had prepared, but the atmosphere was too heavy for culinary appreciation. Adam Silver was the first to arrive, accompanied by his wife Celia. The 60-year-old man bore the marks, of sleepless nights and constant worries on his face. "John, my friend," Adam shook his hand firmly, "when I received your call, I felt a relief I can't even explain. I thought I was going crazy with so many strange things happening." "Tell everyone what you told me on the phone," John requested, waiting for the other neighbors to settle in the living room, which had been expanded with extra chairs. Adam cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with everyone's attention. "Well, it started about 2 months ago. First it was small things, tools that disappeared and reappeared in different places, fences cut without apparent reason." "Same here," interrupted Benjamin Santos, owner of the ranch to the south. "But I thought it was kids messing around." "Me too," Adam continued, "until I found some strange equipment hidden near my spring. They looked like measuring devices or something." Celia touched her husband's arm. "Tell." "For them about the drone man, Adam." "Ah, yes." Adam straightened in his chair. "Last week I saw a drone flying over my property 3 times, always following the course of the stream that begins on our land." Frank, who until then had just been observing, leaned forward. "Adam, have you received any purchase offers recently?" "How do you know?" The astonishment in Adam's voice confirmed John's suspicions. "Oliver Finch showed up there on Thursday. He offered an absurd amount for the spring area." A murmur ran through the room. Several neighbors began to speak at once, reporting similar experiences. "He was at my ranch, too," said Benjamin. "Specific interest in the area near the pond." "And mine," added Mrs. Mercedes, a widow who maintained a small property with the help of her sons. "But I sent him away immediately. I didn't like his manner one bit." John stood up, asking for silence with a gesture. "Folks, I think it's clear what's happening here. Oliver Finch is trying to buy or force the sale of all properties that have access to the main springs in the region." "But why?" asked James Bailey, the youngest of the group, owner of a cattle ranch. Frank took the floor. "Water control means control of everything. Whoever dominates the water, dominates agriculture, dominates land prices, dominates the local economy. And he's using intimidation methods to get what he wants," John added. "Espionage, sabotage, psychological pressure." "Espionage?" Mrs. Mercedes raised her eyebrows. Greg stood up, showing photos of the devices found on the ranch. "We found hidden cameras and microphones here. I bet you have them too." The revelation caused an uproar. Several neighbors began to report situations that now made sense: feeling of being watched, animals agitated without apparent reason, small objects out of place. "That's criminal behavior," exclaimed Benjamin, banging his fist on the table. "It's the behavior of someone who thinks they're above the law," Frank corrected. "But we can't fight intimidation with violence. We have to be smarter." "What do you suggest?" asked Adam. John looked around the room, seeing determination growing in the eyes of each neighbor. "I suggest we organize, that we form an official association of Pinecrest rural producers. United, we're stronger." "An association?" James Bailey seemed interested. "How would it work?" "First, we share information," Frank explained. "Anything strange you observe, communicate immediately to the others. Second, we create a mutual surveillance system. Each ranch helps protect the others. And third," John continued, "we document everything, every intimidation, every device found, every suspicious proposal. We'll build a solid case against Oliver." Mary approached the group carrying more coffee. "And the authorities? Can't the police help?" Frank sighed. "They can and will help, but we need concrete evidence. And Oliver is influential. He has political contacts, expensive lawyers. We can't take shots in the dark." "Then we'll be methodical," said Mrs. Mercedes, with a determination that surprised everyone. "If he wants to play spy, let's show him. We're not fools." Isabella, who had remained quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. "I can help with social media. Create a closed group for quick communication between everyone." "Good idea," Greg approved, "and I can use my agronomy knowledge to identify the most vulnerable points of each property." The meeting extended until late afternoon. When the neighbors began to say goodbye, There was already a structured plan, alternating patrols, a radio and cell phone communication system, photographic documentation of any suspicious activity, and weekly meetings to exchange information. One more thing, Frank said when only Adam and Benjamin were still present. Her Apollo can be trained to recognize the specific smells and sounds of espionage equipment. If you want, I can take him to do a sweep of your properties. That would be a blessing, Adam responded immediately. When they were finally alone, the Anderson family gathered on the porch to evaluate the day. I think we accomplished something important today, John said, watching the sunset tint the coffee plantations orange. We did, Mary agreed. We showed that we're not alone. Apollo approached the group lying down near John's feet. His eyes remained alert, but there was a new tranquility in his posture, as if he too recognized that they were now part of something bigger. Oliver, Finch may have money and influence, Greg said, but he doesn't have what we have. What do we have? Isabella asked. The land, our roots, and each other, John replied. And that's worth more than any amount of money. On the horizon, the first stars began to appear, silent witnesses to a community that had decided to fight for what they considered most sacred, the right to live on their own land, free from intimidation and threats. The week following the meeting brought a noticeable change in the atmosphere of the region. It was as if a silent war had been declared, and both sides were positioning themselves for the definitive battle. John woke up on Monday with Apollo softly barking on the porch, not the alarm bark they already knew, but a different sound, almost a continuous growl. When he went out to check, he found the dog staring fixedly at the road, where a black pickup truck with tinted windows had been parked long enough to leave deep marks in the dirt. They're not even hiding anymore, Frank observed, appearing beside John with a cup of coffee in his hands. It's open intimidation now. How many times did that truck pass by here yesterday? John asked without taking his eyes off the vehicle. 6 times that I counted, always at low speed, always with the occupants observing the house. Greg came, out of the house already dressed to go to college. Dad, I can't get out, they're blocking the exit. As if they had heard the conversation, the truck's occupants started the engine and slowly moved away, but not before slightly lowering the passenger side window, enough for everyone to see they were being filmed. It's escalating, Frank murmured. Oliver is losing patience. Confirmation came 2 hours later, when Isabella came running from town where she had gone to do shopping for Mary. Dad, something terrible happened. She was breathless, clearly shaken. They were spreading rumors about our family at the market. What kind of rumors? Mary asked, putting down the dishes she was washing. Saying that you're involved with illegal things, that the ranch is used for criminal activities. Tears began to roll down Isabella's face. Mrs. Ivy from the market looked at me as if we were... John wrapped his daughter in a protective hug. Shh, my daughter. They're just lies. But people are believing them, Dad. I saw the looks, heard the whispers. Frank clenched his fists. Psychological warfare. First they isolate you socially, then economically. Frank's prediction proved correct when, on Tuesday, 3 regular suppliers of the ranch cancelled contracts without satisfactory explanation. The first claimed changes in company policy, the second said he was reassessing partnerships, and the third simply stopped answering calls. 40 years of business relationships thrown away, John said on the phone with Adam, who had called to report similar problems. They're strangling us economically. Here too, Adam's voice sounded dejected. My coffee buyer said he maybe can't maintain the contract this year. 40 years buying my coffee, John. 40 years. But it was on Wednesday that the situation really became serious. Greg had gone to town to try to resolve supplier issues when his car was intercepted by 2 men on an isolated road. They didn't hurt him, but the message was clear. Tell your father it's time to accept generous offers before they cease to exist. When Greg arrived home, visibly shaken, John made a decision. Enough. This has gone beyond all limits. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he had carefully noted down. Mr. Henry, this is John Anderson from Hope Ranch. I need to hire your services. Henry Morris was the most respected lawyer in Pinecrest, known for not being intimidated by powerful adversaries. When he arrived at the ranch on Thursday afternoon, he brought a voluminous folder and a determined expression. "Mr. John, I read all the documents you sent me," said Henry, settling in the living room. "I'll be direct. We have enough material for a solid lawsuit. But I need to warn you, Oliver Finch has resources to drag any process out for years. And meanwhile, he continues to persecute us," Mary observed. "That's why I suggest a dual strategy," Henry continued. "We'll file the lawsuit and simultaneously approach the press. Public exposure is something men like Finch fear more than lawsuits." Frank leaned forward. "Mr. Henry, in your experience, what's the likelihood of him backing down if he feels exposed?" "High. Men like him depend on reputation to maintain business. Public scandal means financial loss, and that they understand." The conversation was interrupted by Apollo, who abruptly stood up and ran to the window, growling softly. Outside, a new pickup truck had stopped, this time closer to the house. "They're getting bolder," Frank observed, already strategically. Positioning himself. "Mr. Henry," John said calmly, "I think you just witnessed one of the intimidations we've documented." The lawyer took out his cell phone, discreetly filming. "Perfect, more evidence for our case." But it was at that moment that John noticed something that made him freeze. There were 2 children in the truck. When it slowly moved away, he could clearly see the young faces looking through the back window. "Frank," he called softly. "Did you see?" "I saw. And I know what it means." Frank had the most serious expression John had ever seen. "They're showing that they know about our families, that they have access to information about who we love." The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with a new dimension of fear. "This changes everything," Henry said gravely. "We need to act quickly. I'll file a protective order today. And I'll call Ronald at the sheriff's office," Frank added. "It's time to make all of this official." John looked at his family. Mary pale, Isabella frightened, Greg still shaken by the encounter on the road. Then he looked at Apollo, who remained vigilant at the window. "Henry, I want you to file everything today. Frank, make the call to your friend, and I—" John paused, making a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to call the reporter from the regional TV station. It's time to make this story public." "Are you sure, John?" Mary asked. "Once this becomes news, there's no going back." John took his wife's hand, looking into her eyes. "My love, there's been no going back since the moment Oliver decided to mess with our family. Now he's the one who's going to discover what happens when you mess with the wrong people." Apollo barked once, as if approving the decision, and John knew they had reached the point of no return. The silent war was about to become public, and only one side would emerge victorious. Outside, clouds were beginning to form in the sky, promising a storm. Friday morning brought a surprise that no one expected. At 7 o'clock, when the Anderson family was still having breakfast, Apollo began to bark differently. It wasn't a danger alert, but rather one of recognition. A new pickup truck had stopped at the gate, but this time the person who got out was an elegant woman, approximately 40 years old, with blonde hair tied in a bun and clothes that conveyed professionalism. "Good morning," she said when John approached, clearly nervous. "My name is Sarah Finch. I need to speak urgently with you." John stopped in the middle of the path. "Finch, I'm Oliver's wife." Her voice trembled slightly. "And I need to tell the truth about what my husband is doing here." Frank, who had come out of the house upon hearing voices, positioned himself strategically, but Sarah raised her hands in a sign of peace. "Please, I'm not a threat. In fact, I came here because I can't live anymore with what I know." John studied the woman's face, seeing genuine anguish in her eyes. "Speak." Sarah took a deep breath. "Oliver isn't just interested in the springs to control the water. There's something much bigger at stake." She looked around as if afraid of being overheard. "There's a project to install a large mining operation in the region. Water is just part of the plan." "Mining?" Frank approached. "What kind of mining?" "Lithium extraction. There's a significant deposit in the subsoil that extends throughout the spring region." Sarah took an envelope from her purse. I have copies of the geological studies, preliminary contracts, everything here. John felt as if the ground had moved beneath his feet. Lithium? It's the mineral of the future, used in batteries. Technology, worth billions. Sarah extended the documents, but to extract it they need to control the entire area, including the springs. The mining will contaminate the whole region, John. It will destroy everything. Greg, who had approached during the conversation, took the documents. Dad, if this is true— It is true, Sarah interrupted. And there's more. The project has the support of influential politicians. They plan to make it appear that the producers were selling voluntarily to avoid protests and environmental lawsuits. That's why the pressure, the intimidation, Frank murmured, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together. Exactly. If you sold voluntarily, there would be no legal questions about the change in land use. Sarah wiped away a tear that escaped. But I can't be complicit in this anymore. I was born here. I've known these lands since I was a child. Mary, who had heard everything from the porch, approached. Why are you telling us this, and why now? Sarah faced her directly. Because yesterday I discovered that Oliver sent his thugs to intimidate a young man on the road. When I found out it was your son, Mrs. Anderson, that he's the same age as my Peter, her voice broke. I can't let this continue. His thugs? John felt, anger rising. So it was he himself who ordered my son to be threatened. Yes, and it's going to get worse. Sarah dried her eyes, regaining her composure. He has a meeting with international investors scheduled for Monday. If he can prove he has control of the area by then, he'll definitively close the deal. Frank studied the documents that Greg had passed to him. Sarah, these contracts, they show that Oliver has already invested millions in the project. He can't back out. Now. Exactly, that's why he's getting desperate. And desperate people do terrible things. Sarah looked at each of them. You're in real danger. He won't stop here. But now we have proof, John said, holding the documents. We have a way to expose all of this. It won't be easy. Oliver has powerful connections. Politicians, judges, businessmen. Sarah hesitated. But there's one thing he doesn't know that I know. What? Frank asked. There's a complaint filed with the Federal Prosecutor's Office about irregularities in the mining company's licensing process. If we can connect that complaint with the evidence you have about intimidation and espionage— Sarah smiled for the first time. We can bring everything down. Who filed the complaint? John wanted to know. A geologist who worked on the initial studies. He discovered that the environmental reports were doctored to hide the real impact of mining on the springs. Sarah took a card from her purse. This is his contact, Dr. Robert Aguiar. He's willing to testify, but he needs protection. Apollo, who had remained calm throughout the conversation, suddenly stood up and ran toward the road. Her familiar pickup truck was approaching at high speed. Oliver? Sarah turned pale. He must have discovered I'm here. Get inside the house, John ordered. Frank, call Henry and the reporter. Now. Oliver descended from the truck like a hurricane, his face red with anger. Sarah, what the hell are you doing here? Telling the truth, Oliver. Something you should have done a long time ago. Truth? Oliver laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You don't know anything, Sarah. This is business. It's the future of the region. The future? John positioned himself between Oliver and Sarah. You call destroying our land, our water, our life the future? Your life? Oliver looked at him with contempt. You're just obstacles to progress. This region can become prosperous, generate jobs, bring development. For you and your investors, Greg retorted, while we lose everything. You'll be compensated. By what right do you decide the future of our lands? Mary approached, indignation evident in her voice. Oliver looked around, realizing he was surrounded and that his wife had revealed his plans. His expression changed, becoming dangerous. You don't know who you're messing with, he said slowly. I have enough power to destroy all of you. Power based on lies and intimidation, Frank appeared, holding the phone. I just spoke with the Federal Prosecutor's Office. They're very interested in our documents. Oliver's face paled. What documents? Sarah stepped forward. The mining company contracts, the doctored studies, the records of the threats. Everything, Oliver. I handed over everything. For a moment, Oliver was silent, processing the magnitude of what had happened. Then his expression hardened even more. You've just declared war against very powerful people. You think a handful of documents will stop billions of dollars? No, John replied calmly, but the truth will. And now everyone will know what it is. Apollo barked once, and they could all hear the sound of sirens approaching on the road. Oliver looked at Sarah. One last time. You don't know what you've done. I know exactly what I did, she replied firmly. I did what was right. When the federal police vehicles arrived, followed by the regional TV station van, John knew the battle had been won. But looking at his family, at the neighbors who were beginning to arrive attracted by the commotion, and at Apollo who remained vigilant, he knew that the true victory was yet to come. 3 months after the morning that changed everything, John Anderson walked through the coffee plantations of Hope Ranch with a feeling he hadn't experienced for a long time, complete peace. The aroma of coffee flowers mixed with the damp earth after rain created a sensory symphony that he had almost forgotten to appreciate. Dad, more support letters have arrived. Isabella ran to meet him, carrying a bundle of correspondence. This time from ranchers in Montana. They want to know our story to apply it in their regions. John smiled, quickly leafing through the letters. Since the report about Oliver Finch's scheme had aired nationally, Hope Ranch had become a symbol of resistance for rural producers across the country. And there's a special letter, Isabella continued with a sparkle in her eyes. From the Department of Environmental Protection, they want to invite us to participate in a national spring protection program. Has your mother seen this? Yes. She said she's going to prepare a special lunch to celebrate. They walked back to the house together, where they found a scene that had become common in recent weeks. Neighbors gathered on the porch, animatedly discussing future projects and plans. John, Adam waved from the veranda, you need to hear the news that Mr. Frank brought. Frank was sitting in his favorite chair, Apollo faithfully lying at his side. The dog had become a local celebrity after the reports, but maintained his natural dignity. Dr. Robert Aguiar, the geologist who testified against the mining company, called me today, Frank announced when John approached. The lithium extraction project has been officially cancelled. The court determined that all licenses were fraudulently obtained. A chorus of celebrations rose from the group. Mary appeared at the kitchen door, smiling at seeing the joy of their friends. And there's more, Frank continued. Oliver Finch has been ordered to reimburse all damages caused to producers in the region. Additionally, he's prohibited from acquiring rural lands in the state for the next 10 years. And Sarah? John asked. Oliver's wife's courage in revealing the truth had been fundamental to unmasking the scheme. She moved to Boston with her son, said she wants to start a new life away from all this, but she sent a special message for you. Frank smiled. That she never regretted doing the right thing. Greg arrived from town at that moment, bringing his own news. Dad, the university dean approved my research project on spring preservation. I'll be able to develop the study right here on the ranch. And me? Isabella got excited. Can I be part of the research? I've always wanted to better understand how the water cycle works. Of course you can. In fact, the project calls for involvement from the entire community. John observed his family, his friends, his property that remained there untouched and prosperous. 3 months ago, all of this was threatened. Now they had not only preserved what they had, but also created something bigger. The Pinecrest Producers Association is working better than we dreamed, Benjamin commented. We have 43 members now, and we're implementing sustainability projects on all properties. Not to mention rural tourism, added Mrs. Mercedes. Since our story became known, I receive at least 5 families per week wanting to see our region, and they all want to hear about our struggle. Mary joined the group, bringing a tray with fresh coffee and her famous snacks. You know what makes me happiest about all this? What? John asked, putting his arm around his wife's waist. It's seeing how we transformed something that began as fear into hope for other people. How many communities have already been saved, because they learned about our story. Frank stood up, extending his hand to Apollo, who immediately came to his side. Speaking of transformation, I have a proposal for you. Everyone turned to him, curious. The state police wants to create a pilot program of protection dogs for rural communities. Apollo would be the first instructor. He stroked the animal's head. Would you agree to have him stay here permanently as part of the program? John looked at the German shepherd, who had been much more than a guardian. He had been the catalyst for their resistance, the symbol of their courage. Apollo has always been part of the family, he replied. It would be an honor to have him with us officially. As if understanding every word, Apollo approached John, placed his paw in his hand and barked once, a sound of approval and contentment. Then it's decided, Frank smiled. Apollo stays, and Hope Ranch becomes the training center for the program. The sun began to set, tinting the sky with golden hues that reflected on the verdant coffee plantations. John observed his property, the same fences, the same pastures, the same spring that had motivated the entire conflict. But something had fundamentally changed. You know what we discovered? He said to the group. That our greatest wealth was never the land itself, nor the water, nor the coffee. What was it then? Adam asked. It was our capacity to unite when we needed to. It was discovering that together we're stronger than any threat. John looked at each face around him. It was learning that it's worth fighting for what's right, even when victory seems impossible. Mary held his hand. And it was discovering that our small ranch could inspire people from all over the country. Isabella approached, hugging her parents. Dad, can I ask a question? Of course, my daughter. If everything happened again, would you do the same thing? John looked at Apollo, who remained alert but tranquil, eyes fixed on the horizon like an eternal sentinel. Then he looked at Frank, who had risked so much to help them, at Greg, who had grown during the crisis, at Mary, who had been his strength in all difficult moments, at the neighbors who had become true brothers in the struggle. I would do everything exactly the same, he replied with conviction, because we discovered that our land is worth every drop of sweat, every tear, every moment of fear we faced to protect it. The first star appeared in the darkening sky, and Apollo barked softly, not a warning, but a celebration. Hope Ranch had honored its name, offering hope not just for its owners, but for all who believed it's worth fighting for what is just. And in the quietness of the night that was arriving, the spring continued to flow, clear and constant, nourishing the